Okay, we are continuing to talk about tools to use to be more persuasive. And we've talked about evidence, and we've talked about establishing credibility. The third tool we want to talk about is using reason and logic. Now, I think most of us want to consider ourselves reasonable and logical, that we think things through in a logical manner. Some do it more than others, but we want to consider it as a tool to use in our presentations. And we do this in this chapter by looking at 4 different examples of methods of reasoning or logic that can persuade others if we follow them. The first one is what they call, I got lost here in my notes. Let me back up here. Sorry about that. Talk about making quality presentations, and I got lost here. Okay, first of all, reasoning from specific instances. That is where we say, this happened, and this happened, and this happened, or this is this, and this is that, and that. And therefore, based on these examples or single instances, we draw a conclusion from what we see. I'll give you a great example, or one that's maybe not so great. So this morning, at about 4 o'clock, I was up early, and I noticed the sliding door was open a little bit. I think my daughter had let our dog out and then left the door open for him to come back in. This is Kona. Kona likes, the husky likes to sleep outside. So I went over and I closed the door. Kona was still outside. I saw him. But then I noticed, and this would be example 1 or factor 1. He was smelling around the outside of the door. And usually when he's smelling like that, he's smelling something, right? And what might be, then I'm thinking, uh-oh, was there a rat in this area? Because we have rats that run around up the hill and all that. So I'm thinking, okay, so the door's open. Second, he's smelling. That's the second factor. Third, I'm sitting down watching early morning news, I think, and I hear a noise in the kitchen. I don't see anything, and I'm thinking, conclusion, I wonder if a rat came in and now is either behind the refrigerator or under the stove. I'm looking over there. And so I'm kind of on high rat awareness now. That's my conclusion that I drew. Is that a logical conclusion? Yeah, it is. Because they quite often Kona's the one. Bruno doesn't do it that much, but he'll catch a rat. Apparently, they drown in the pool, and he'll pull them out. So I know they're around, and all that. So that's my conclusion. But you see how I had? So I was going to say, trying to persuade you that there's a rat in my house or a mouse. Number 1, the door was open. Number 2, Kona was sniffing around. Number 3, the noises. Conclusion, not a full conclusion. There might be a rat. So I'm looking and waiting and watching. I brought the dogs in the kitchen, let them smell around. They didn't seem to clue in on anything, so maybe not. Or maybe he got his snack and went back outside. I don't know. But anyway, I'll keep you posted. I hate rats. I really do. I like pet rats, but rats in my house, rats in my yard, no thank you. But anyway. So that's reasoning from specific to making a general conclusion. And the examples they give of why this is there's weaknesses to this type of argument is, first of all, they say you can't include all instances. So there may be certain situations that don't fit the plan that you have. Number 2, there may be just as many counter arguments as there are arguments. In other words, that the dogs weren't aware of any animals in the house, and I haven't seen any evidence and all that. Those may be counter arguments to my conclusion. And then third, there may be exceptions to my conclusion. And for example, an exception might be that a couple of weeks ago, there was a possum in our yard at night. Who knows what all is going on? That's why I want to get one of those Ring doorbells, just to see what in the world is going on. Up the street, we're not in the mountains, we're kind of in a hill area, but they on their Ring, they had a bear out in their yard. We've never seen that before. We've seen bobcats, we've seen peacocks, we've seen raccoons, we have seen rabbits, but now we got a bear, probably chasing the rabbits. But anyway, so it's not the best way. But they say, first of all, so anyway, so the textbook says this. Be sure your examples are representative. If you're giving us weird examples that are just out of this, the examples I gave you of the door open and those kinds of things, those are all reasonable to draw a conclusion. But if I start talking about aliens opening the door and aliens landing in the backyard, then it becomes kind of non-representative of what's going on, and people will tend to be more pessimistic about your influence. Okay, second is make sure that they are fair and unbiased. Well, those examples, there's nothing to be biased about except the fact that I hate rats and I don't want them in my house. So maybe, I guess that could be, that since I don't like them so much, I'm going to say, oh, it's a rat. It's got to be a rat, must be a rat. Rat in my house, I don't want a rat in my house. So I guess that'd be a bias. And then third, they say use statistics and testimonies to back it up. Well, I could have testimonies from my wife saying, I've seen rats in our house before. I've seen them in the backyard. We can see them run across the back fence once in a while up the hill. So that backs up the point. So anyway, but that's one method. The second one is actually the opposite, that we are reasoning from a principle. That we start with a principle and then we give experiences or individual items to back up the principle. Let me read this to you. This type of reasoning moves in the opposite direction from reasoning from specific instances. It begins with a general principle or statement, and rather than a specific instance, then adds a specific example to back up the and draw the conclusion. So let's see, what else does it say? You may need to include evidence that confirms the general principle before presenting it to your example. If they do not agree with the general principle in your example, if they do not agree with the general principle, your examples will be ineffective. So you got to make a general statement that is viable, believable. And then your example needs to back up that point. So I might say that all huskies dig and run away and want to get out and run. And then I could say, for example, our husky, if you leave the gate open, he's gone. And you have to go chase him. So does that mean that all huskies run away? No, but it's one example of it. So I think between the two, reasoning from instances to draw a conclusion versus a conclusion, and then an example is a stronger approach. So the first one over the second one. Okay, the third type of reasoning is what is called causal reasoning, that something happened and therefore that led to something else to happen. And I'll give you another rat example. I'm just rat examples today. Let's say there is a rat in the house. And I would say, and the cause was because my daughter left that door open this morning. Well, is that viable? It's possible. But the problem is it's weak and there's other options available. So you have to be careful with this, that one thing causes another. And there's a great phrase that I'm going to say here, inferring causation from mere correlation. The fact that there was a rat in the house, to assume it's because the door was left open is like a likely cause, but not necessarily the only cause. Maybe it came in a box that from a shipper. I've got about a half dozen Amazon boxes I'm looking at here. Let's say there's a rat in the box that came in, or that it was in my wife's purse when she came in, or one of the dogs brought it in, they thought it was dead and it was still alive. So there's lots of options. Inferring causation from mere correlation. Just because two things happened doesn't automatically mean that one caused the other. There are such things as coincidences, that things happen that are not related to one another. So be careful if you use this type of argument to say this happened and therefore this happened. Make sure that there is an actual connection between the two, and you're just not assuming causation based on the fact that they happened closely together. Okay, and then are there other factors that you're not taking into account? Don't oversimplify the process, that there might have been multiple causes that brought about a consequence and not just one. And did you, when you picked one, did you pick the most significant one, or are these other factors, do they need to be considered as well? Then the fourth type of reasoning is what is called analogical reasoning. And this is where that you are paralleling situations and illustrations to back up one another. They give the example in the textbook of comparing ping pong and tennis because they're both paddle sports and they have similarities. But are the two things you're comparing close enough together? I was actually going to make up this whole thing. I remember back in college, oh my gosh, back in the early 80s, we were taking my dorm mates and I were all taking a tennis class together. And then we would go play racquetball. And if you ever play tennis and then play racquetball, you go in and you miss, I forget which one influenced the other, but we would miss the ball because we're used to a longer racket versus a shorter racket. So don't play the two close together. But so if you're comparing, ping pong or racquetball with tennis, while there are many similarities, understand there are differences too, and you need to account for the differences in your presentation when you're making a comparison between the two. And then they also comment, so they say, so if you're going to use analogical reasoning or parallel reasoning, make sure that you're comparing apples with apples. Make sure they're not too different. And the other thing, the comment they make is a suggestion is, if you are counter-arguing somebody else's presentation in some kind of a debate, and they make a point about two things that are parallel, can you identify ways that their comments and their two illustrations are actually distinct and different, and their parallel they're pointing out is not actually an adequate parallel. There's too many differences. Can you identify differences to kind of ruin their argument for how these two things are the same? Okay, the next portion they talk about are fallacies, which are false reasoning. Ways we think that don't actually fit. They sound logical, they feel logical, but they're really not. And they give you, I think 10, I counted 10 in there, different methods or ways that we use logic incorrectly. One is called ad hominem, is where you are debating with somebody, and instead of debating the points of their argument, you attack the person. You're against the person. And you're telling them their policies on taxes or schools or whatever it is, and you're saying that they're a lousy father, a lousy husband, that they got a speeding ticket last year. One probably has nothing to do with the other. And that's a fallacy, false argument. The other example I want to give you, and I'll leave you to read the rest, is bandwagon. And that is where everybody's doing it, therefore we should do it too. All the other nations in the world are doing X. Therefore, the United States should do X as well. Why? Well, because everybody else is doing it. Okay? So it just means that just because everybody, there's that old thing, if all of your friends jumped off a bridge, would you? Just because everybody's doing it doesn't mean it's the smart thing or the right thing or the best thing. So the way I would do this is, as you develop your speech, one of your closing strategies should be, take the list of 10 items in the chapter. Go through your speech. And if you're using logic as a tool, are you using any false logic methods or fallacies to make your point? Just use that as a checklist and go through and see, what am I missing here? What am I doing incorrectly? Okay, so the final tool to use for persuasion is emotional appeal, or appealing to emotions. So in a sense, we're kind of setting aside logic here. I don't want to say that completely as a blanket statement because there's still logic involved with emotion. They're not two completely separate items. They are connected, but we're aiming for the heart, not as much for the head. And one thing the chapter says, I'm just going to state it now and then come back to it, is that fair? Is it ethically right to use emotion to persuade people? And if there's no law, and what they're saying is, if you're just persuading people based on emotion, that you can get them to cry or laugh or cheer or jeer about something, and there's no logical connection, that you probably shouldn't do it that way. But if you can team up using logic as well as emotion and bind them together, great. In other words, it shouldn't just be emotion, but it can be emotion with logical connections. Okay, so how to do this? I have an example. Well, they say a few things. First of all, use emotional language. So we're talking about, passion and feeling and joy and excitement. So you're using emotional words more maybe than did we land on the moon or not? Okay, I don't know how much emotion is in if we landed on the moon and the evidence you might give. But anyway, you're using joy and excitement, so language. You're also going to want to paint word pictures that are emotionally based. Tell us about, so you've seen the commercials for the American Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, and the dogs shivering in the cold, and the skinny dogs, and the sick dogs, and the ones with the big chains around their neck. Emotional appeal. All they need to do is show you the pictures and play the song, the background song, In the Eyes of an Angel, and you're crying and you're going to go get a dog. Bruno, we got from the ASPCA, so we got their magazines and all that, but not based on the commercials, but that's where we did get him. But here's an experience. So I was teaching a class on persuasion a couple of years ago. And as an example in the class of persuasion, I showed one of those ASPCA dog commercials. And so I'm trying to show them, and I start crying because I think of Bruno all the time and what a lousy life he had and how much better off he is now. I was overwhelmed by the emotion of the commercial as I was trying to show the class a commercial as an example of persuasion. I was overwhelmed purely by emotion. It had no logical source whatsoever. It was just emotion. So it can happen. And it makes me want to go out and get another dog right now. But anyway, so use emotion, emotional language, emotional word pictures, and then third, speak with sincerity. So if I was to speak about getting a dog, it would be absolutely with sincerity because I love, our dog and that we got from the pound, and I would do it again. So I speak with sincerity. In fact, even right now I'm tearing up a little bit. Isn't that ridiculous? But anyway, so you can use that. So the last thing I'm going to say, and be done with this, is they say that, I already kind of mentioned this, I guess, speeches on questions of fact, whether something is accurate or not or true, you don't need a whole lot of emotional appeal. But if you're coming up with a plan of how to help others, for example, and it has to do with children or people with needs, you probably have seen the St. Jude Hospital commercials, and they're showing children in need. People are going to give to that because they are touched by children in need and in pain. So use emotion. It is effective, but you got to use it with the right type of speech. Don't bother with the questions of fact speeches, but use it with logic. Don't just use emotional appeal alone, because it doesn't carry a whole lot of, carries power, but it might be manipulative if you just go for the emotion and there's no logical background and backbone to your presentation. All right, so as I go grab a Kleenex, I'm done with this chapter. Thank you.